Just like with design, it's one thing to know how to write HTML, it's another thing to be able to do it well. So here are some of my tips and tricks for writing really, really good, high quality HTML. So looking at our code here, the first thing I want to call out is just remember your semantics. It's a spectrum. You can be as vague or as specific as you want, and the more specific you can be, the more semantic you can be, the more consumable your HTML is going to be, both from a developer perspective, as somebody else or yourself in the future comes back and reads your code, or the browser and accessibility tools as well. You're going to see huge, huge benefits from really focusing in on that and trying to be as descriptive as possible in your HTML. So don't use divs for everything. They have a time and place. I'm not saying don't use them. I use them all the time. But do try to use your sections, your mains, your headers, your footers, as much as you can. Logically think through your HTML and just try to really lean into that semantic markup. The next thing I'm going to encourage you to do, pay very close attention to your indentation and how you are physically structuring and laying out your code. Look at this here. Notice how we have the HTML, it's indented, the head, the body, everything is indented, and it's very easy at a glance to see where everything is related to everything else. And then you can leverage tools like this. You can do your toggles and your drop downs and really lean into what your IDE does. Now your IDE takes care of a lot of this for you, but this used to not be the case, and it's definitely something to always pay attention to as you're continuing to work on your skills. Another thing I'm going to call out here, and this is something you're going to run into a little bit more as you get into CSS, but try and use the least number of elements possible. You can get into situations where you're just adding div after div after div to try and make something work. And I would say get it working and then look at that code and see if you can't take out some of the elements as well. It's just going to make your code a lot easier to understand and consume, especially if you have to maintain it for a long time. And it's going to make it easier to collaborate on as well. So as much as possible, just try to use the least amount of code to express what you're trying to accomplish. Always remember your accessibility as well. One H1 per page, every image gets an alt tag. When you're working on forms, include the for and the ID and the name. All this stuff is going to help all of your users. It's going to help you write more semantic code, and it's going to help everybody have a better experience when they're working with your HTML. So really, really encourage you to keep that in mind and make it a habit of trying to incorporate as much as possible. Another really big tip, experiment with new elements. There's really, really great resources out there. If we go look right now at the Mozilla Developer Network, they have a great reference of all the HTML elements. Go ahead and take a look at this. Use it as a reference and say, oh, I didn't know that there's, let's see here, one that we haven't used yet, a block quote, for instance. We can go ahead and try that in our next project. And they really tell you when you should be using this as well. So give it a read through here and kind of say, oh, I can use an HR to do like a line break or something like that. And you can get really creative as well. Part of the fun of programming and working with code is that creativity. It's different than us on the design side, but as you understand and learn these things, you can start thinking about, how can I start creatively using these in my code and also in my design as well? So really, really powerful just to build up that knowledge. You don't have to get flashcards. You don't have to sit there memorizing this. Just, every time you're working on an HTML project, give it a scan and say, is there a way for me to incorporate some of these elements into my work? And last but not least, I'm going to encourage you to learn as many shortcuts as possible. We've learned a few here as well. We learned how to duplicate. If I did it right. You learn how to select a whole line, things like that. Anything you can do to learn a shortcut is going to help you tremendously. It's going to make you go faster. Same thing with Figma, right? You learn shortcuts there. You're going to want to learn the shortcuts of your IDE as well. So really encourage you to explore the settings, customize it, tune it. VS Code is extremely customizable, so explore those options there, make it your own, so that way you can get the most productivity out of your work in the shortest amount of time. And last but not least, practice. Practice, practice, practice. The only way to get better at HTML is to write HTML and to write bad HTML for a long, long time. I know I did when I was starting. My first couple of websites were not great, but I learned from there. I got more semantic over time. I learned these things. and I got better and better, and you will too. So feel free to always ping me if you have a question in the comments. If you want some advice, some guidance, hit me up on Twitter, or X now as they call it. So feel free to always reach out to me if you want some guidance, you want a pointer, you want some feedback. I'd love to help.